Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Francesco, and with today's topic, I want to talk about that was a bit louder than I expected. Plumbing facilities. So, has this ever happened to you where you go somewhere and you find that you have to wait in line, and the one time in your day where you don't want to have to wait in line, right, when trying to use a bathroom? Well, what we're going to be looking at today, for the purposes of this topic, is going to be in trying to figure out, according to the Ontario Building Code, how many water closets, how many urinals, and how many lavatories are going to be required for a specific Part 3 occupancy. Another way to look at it is, if you're given a specific Part 3 building and its major occupancy, how many toilets are going to be required for people using that space, how many urinals are going to be required, and how many sinks are going to be required. That's what we're going to be learning today. Okay? So let's get on with this right away. The first thing we have to figure out then is how many people are going to be using that space, because that's going to be the first thing that's going to tell us then how many plumbing fixtures are going to be required, right? Luckily, we've covered this before in topic 4, that was occupant load, so I definitely recommend that you go and check that out. That's where you use table 3.1.17.1, the factor in this table that was dependent on the major occupancy to determine the number of people. And the fancy wording that the building code uses for number of people, don't forget, is occupant load. Okay? Now, when it comes to plumbing fixtures, you use this table, except that according to sentence 3.7.4.21, for one specific major occupancy, you don't use this table. And that specific occupancy is this one here, business and personal service, the D major occupancies. You don't use this table for plumbing fixtures only. Instead, what you are going to be using is a factor of 14 meter squares per person. And that's what this sentence says. For plumbing fixtures, don't use this table. Use 14 meter squares per person for D major occupancies. The other exception to this table, according to the following sentence right here, sentence 3.7.4.22, is for industrial occupancies. So F type occupancies. This sentence says that in specific circumstances where the total number of staff can be determined very accurately for F-type major occupancies, for industrial major occupancies, you don't have to use the table, and instead you can use this number here. Okay? Those are the only two exceptions to this table. For the purposes of this course, my dear students, the one that you're going to be most concerned about is going to be related to these ones here, business and personal services. So the D type occupancies that I just showed you, those are going to be the ones that you want to make sure you do not use the table. For major occupancies in the F domain, industrial, don't worry about it, okay? Because I'll never invoke this sentence here, okay? All right. So the very next thing that we want to do then is start learning a bit of the terminology and how to figure some of this stuff out, okay? These here, you and I, we call them something different. The building code calls them water closets, or WC for short. You and I typically refer to these as toilets, okay? According to sentence 3.7.4.23, what it says is that once you figure out the occupant load for a space, you must assume that 50% of that occupant load will be directed towards women's washrooms or female washrooms, and 50% of that occupant load will be directed towards men's washrooms or male washrooms, okay? There are some very minor exceptions to this split, and I invite you to go and check them out. You get directed from this sentence to the exceptions. But for the purposes of this introductory course, my dear students, this is what we'll be assuming. So once you find the occupant load, you want to assume that 50% of that occupant load will be directed towards a female washroom, and 50% of that occupant load will be directed towards a male washroom. So in the top right corner here, or I guess that's your top left corner. In the top left corner there, I'm going to keep both a stylized female and then male figure to indicate that whatever is on screen applies for both a male washroom and a female washroom. Okay? The next article, the next article of plumbing fixture is lavatories. Right here, or what you and I typically call sinks. That's what are typically referred to in North America. According to sentence 3.7.4.26, the number of sinks are derived from the number of water closets. So once you figure out the number of water closets required based on the occupant load, you take that number, divide it by 2, and round up. That's what this sentence says. Now, there are some minor exceptions under sentence 7 related to circular or long troughs, and they relate to a certain length. So an equivalent circumference of 500 millimeters in length or 500 millimeters in length corresponds to 1 sink. So go check out this exception. You and I in this course, we will only look at regular sinks. So we will never play around with this exception when it comes to sinks, okay? But go check out both sentences to see what I mean. Finally, urinals. This only applies to male washrooms, okay? It does not apply to female washrooms as of yet in Ontario. And according to these two clauses, so that's 3.7.4.2 4A and 4B under Division B of the Ontario Building Code, there are 2 distinct cases that you can have for calculating urinals in a male washroom. So you're basically allowed to replace some of the water closets in a male washroom with the same number of urinals. For all cases, you're allowed to replace up to 2/3 of the water closets with urinals, except for one very specific case here, and that's for one of the B major occupancies, where it goes down to 1/5. Okay? But we're going to play around a little bit with examples. So both of these correspond to both of these. And I'll show you maybe what I mean right now, if I could do that. Oh yeah, and you should check, there are a couple of exceptions. I think one is related to the case where there's only 2 water closets in a male washroom. Then how do you make this happen here? Okay? All right. So just to give an example of what this means here. This is up to, but no more than 2/3 of the water closets can be replaced with urinals. So what that means is that if you have 3 water closets, you can replace 2 of them with urinals. So instead of having 3 water closets, you end up with 1 water closet and 2 urinals. So when you calculate that number of urinals, it replaces the same number of water closets. Okay? It does not add to it. Let me give you the steps then to figure out the number of plumbing fixtures for most cases. This is for part 3 type buildings. Step number 1, you must always determine the major occupancy of that space, of that building under consideration. That's topic 2. So go check out topic 2 for the steps, the necessary calculations if needed, and all the appropriate building code references. Step number 2, you must calculate then the occupant load for this major occupancy in that space. That's topic 4. The only difference is that for D major occupancies, right, the one exception that I pointed out, you can't use the table. You must use 14 meters 14 meters squared per person. Finally, no, not even finally, we're halfway. You take the occupant load that you find, and you divide it in half, where half of it will be directed to male washrooms, and the other half will be directed to female washrooms. Then, you use this number of occupants for each washroom to determine the number of water closets. Sometimes you'll even be able to use that information to determine the number of sinks, of lavatories, but you must go to the correct sentence or table, which I'll show you. Number 5. If you couldn't find the number of lavatories from step 4, I'll show you how to figure out the number of lavatories then. Step 6, you wrap it up by determining the number of urinals for male washrooms only. So I'm thinking that maybe I should point out to you the most critical step, the one that gives trouble, especially if you're new at this, which is step number 4, determining the number of water closets. This is so critical that I'm going to take some time to just chat about this step here, step number 4, because it's very common if you're new at the Ontario Building Code, or you're just learning, or you're rushing to show your work for this, that you don't do this step correctly. And not doing this step correctly makes all of these steps 0. Okay? So let me talk a little bit more about this step. Step number 4, finding the number of water closets for male and female bathrooms. Okay? According to the Ontario Building Code, under these articles right here, notice how each of these articles corresponds to a specific major occupancy. In fact, for C major occupancies, there are 2 separate articles, whether it's dwellings or everything else. It is common, especially if you're starting to learn this, that you see this and you never go past this. But what you must do instead is, once you find the major occupancy of your space, you must find the proper article for that major occupancy. You can't just use the very first one and do all your work based on this, because it makes your whole work on it 0. Wrong, okay? So this is critical. When finding the water closets, the number of water closets, you want to get that information from the appropriate article corresponding to the appropriate major occupancy. I'm showing this to you here, okay? I'm listing them for you, but it might be different in your version of the Ontario Building Code, your edition, or depending on your amendment. So go find them in your building code, okay? It's going to be under subsection 3.7.4, Division B of the Ontario Building Code. Okay, I think, how about we stop chit-chatting about this? Sorry, not enough chit-chat, yes, yet. This is so important that, look at this, okay, do not forget this, okay? And that's valid, because this has been a problem in the past if you're rushing, right? If you're new at this and you're rushing, I found that students tend to miss this, right? They just stop at this article here regardless of major occupancy. You're here to prove me wrong, that this is not going to happen ever again. You got this, okay? Now, I'm going to stop with the chit-chat and maybe move on to doing an example, okay? I'm going to read this example and explain it a little bit. Determine the minimum number of plumbing fixtures, so that's water closets, lavatories, and urinals, required for each sex on the 4th story of an office building measuring 32 meters by 41 meters. So what this question is saying is, you're given some kind of a building, the 4th story of an office building. So you have the major occupancy, you're given dimensions to find the area, and you're told you want to find the number of toilets, sinks, and urinals. The minimum number of these values according to the Ontario Building Code. We're going to use the same 6 steps that I just outlined a few moments ago. So let's start with step number 1, which is determining the major occupancy of this space. If you go back to topic 2, the major occupancy of this space is D. So go back to topic 2, my dear students, so you're reminded of the steps required and all the building code references you must write to justify your selection of D major occupancy in this case, okay? Building and personal services. Step number 2 is the occupant load. So for the occupant load, we're going to calculate the number of people for plumbing fixtures only that are going to be required in this space. And that requires you to do a fraction, a division between the area and the occupant load factor from table 3.1.17.1, according to topic 4. But don't forget, okay, there's something special about D major occupancies for plumbing. Let's figure out the area. The area is going to be the length times the width. So 32 meters times 41 meters equals 1,312 meters squared. And here's the exception, okay? For D major occupancies only, you don't use table 3.1.17.1, and instead you use this factor of 14 meters squared per person. With this factor, then, you do the area divided by this factor, and you round up. Always round up to the nearest person. 94 persons is what we get from this. Okay, I'm just going to rearrange things up here so I don't lose track of that information. Step number 3. We take the number of people, 94, and divide it by 2. And that's because then 47 people will be assumed to be using the male washrooms, and 47 will be assumed to be using the female washroom. Then, this is the critical step. Step number 4, we have to find the correct sentence or table to determine the number of water closets. If I go through all those articles that I had listed here, I find that 3.7.4.7 is the correct one for an office major occupancy. So I look at sentence 1, and that sentence 1 points to table 3.7.4.7, which is this one right here. So when I look at that table, notice how there are 2 columns. So I'm going to start with the leftmost column, which has rows for number of people for each sex. Because we have 47, we go in the row that has 25 to 49, okay? And then in the other column, we have the corresponding number of water closets right here of toilets. So where the row and the column intersect, that's how many water closets there will be in each of the male and female bathrooms, okay? It's that simple, I promise you. It's that simple. So what we get is that for the female and the male washrooms, each of them will have 3 water closets based on 47 people each. Second to last step, step number 5, lavatories. That's the number of sinks. So we find the proper reference for it, which is sentence 3.7.4.25 under division B, which says that you take the number of water closets, divide by 2, round up. So we take this number, 3 divided by 2, 1.5, we round up. So we have 2 lavatories each. So 2 sinks each for the male and female washrooms. I'm summarizing this information right here. The final step. For men's washrooms only, for male washrooms only, we have to calculate the number of urinals that can replace the equivalent number of water closets. According to clause 3.7.4.24b, up to 2/3 of the male water closets can be replaced with urinals. So we take 2/3 of 3 and we get 2. So that means that 2 of these water closets can be replaced with urinals. So we end up in the male washroom only with actually 1 urinal and 2 urinals and 1 water closet from just 3 water closets. Okay, so this here would be the final answer. In the female washroom, you'd have 3 water closets and 2 lavatories. In the male washroom, you'd have 1 water closet, 2 lavatories, and 2 urinals. That's all there is to it, okay? Let's do another example. We're going to pick a different major occupancy with a new twist to it. So I'm going to read the question and then chat about it a little bit. Determine the minimum number of plumbing fixtures, water closets, lavatories, and urinals required for each sex of a non-residential college building measuring 22 meters by 33 meters. Half of that area is occupied by classrooms, the other half by laboratories. Interesting. So first of all, step number 1, we have to find the major occupancy of this non-residential college building. So according to topic 2, we go and check out topic 2 and we find that that's an A2 major occupancy. If you're not sure how we got this, go check out topic 2, okay, for all the references and steps. So I'm just going to clean things up a little bit. Next step, number 2, is to find the occupant load. How many people are expected to be in this space? And here's the little twist. Out of the area of 22 meters by 33, half of that area is being used for classrooms. The other half is being used for laboratories. So we are going to use this formula, but we have to calculate the proper area and then select the proper occupant load factor for each of these spaces, classrooms and laboratories. So the area is 22 meters by 33 divided by 2 for each space, which is 363 meters squared. then we have to go to table 3.1.17.1 for classroom laboratories to find the corresponding occupant load factor. Because this is not a D major occupancy, we are allowed to use this table for the occupant load factor. And now we have to divide this area by each of these factors for the corresponding occupant load for each of these spaces. So we get 197 for the classrooms portion and 79 for the laboratory portion. You add the two together for a total of 276 people. Okay? We have a total of 276 people. According to step number 3, we divide that by 2 because half of it will be directed to the female washrooms, the other half to the male washrooms. That's going to be 138 each. And I should remind you about this because this is a common silly error. People are whole numbers. So if you get a number that's not a whole number, when you do all of these calculations for people, you round up. You never round down. Okay? Round up because people are whole numbers. All right. Now we have to go step 4 and find the correct sentence or table to determine the number of water closets for this major occupancy and this occupant load. According to the fact that it's an assembly type occupancy, we start with Article 3.7.4.3. So we read the first sentence, sentence number 1, which says, go and check 15 different articles first before you come back to sentence number 1. So you have to check all 15 of these, 3.7.4.32 all the way to 16, to see which one applies to a non-residential college building. If you just use one, like if you don't bother going to these here, that's a mistake. I mean, it might be that you go back to one, but you have to check these just to be on the safe side, because you have to do this first before you go back to one. In our case, the proper sentence that applies to non-residential college buildings is sentence 15, which is what you select. And what it says is that for females, you take the number of females, divide by 75, and that will give you the number of water closets. For a male washroom, you take the number of males, you divide by 100, and that will be the number of water closets for a male washroom. So let's do that. 138 divided by 75, what is that? 138 divided by 100, what is that? I'm giving you a chance to do it so you can see if your number matches what I get. 2 for each. Don't forget, people are whole numbers. So if you don't get a whole number here, you want to make sure you round up to the nearest whole number. So that's 2 each for male and female washrooms based on this occupant load and based on that major occupancy. Second to last step is the number of sinks, lavatories, or lavs for short. We go to 3.7.4.26, which basically says divide by 2 the number of water closets and then round up. Now, we're going here because the sentence that we used, 3.7.4.315, to find this, has nothing in there about lavatories, so we revert back to this. So this is relatively easy, right? 2 divided by 2, how many lavatories is that? It's 1, right? So 1 each for male and female washrooms. Now, for urinals, okay, this is the final step. So we have 2 water closets, 1 lavatory for each female and male washrooms. For urinals, based on this major occupancy, we go to clause 4b. So that is clause 3.7.4.24b, which says that up to 2/3 of the water closets in the male washrooms can be replaced with a urinal. So we do up to 2/3, and that means 1 urinal can replace 1 of the water closets. So what we get is that the male washroom goes from having 2 water closets to actually having 1 water closet and 1 urinal, okay? However, this is just one odd case where also the exception to this applies. And that exception is under, I think it's sentence 5. Yes, right here. So sentence 5, so 3.7.4.25, says, and just have it here, if only 2 water closets are required for males, 1 urinal is permitted to be substituted for one of the water closets. So that gives us the same answer, okay? But it's an odd exception that it works in this specific case, okay? That's it. That's basically 2 examples. You want to make sure that you do the homework to practice other examples. But before I send you to the homework, I want to mention this. Calculating the number of water closets for any major occupancy can sometimes get confusing when you start dealing with over 100 occupant loads for the male washrooms and the female washrooms too. And that's because the tables, I'm just going to show it for you. Okay, the tables in general, right here. Okay, the tables in general, if you do have to use a table specifically, the last row for every one of these tables deals with an over something. So in this case, it's over 400. In this case, it's over 400. But often what you'll find is something like this, over 100 or over 425, like the last row. And what this says is that basically you have to do some more calculations to figure out the number of people required for the number of, depending on the number of occupant loads based on the number of people. And this can be sometimes confusing. So let me read you, for example, this one here. For B major occupancies, table 3.7.4.4, under over 100, it says 6 plus 1 for each additional increment of 30 persons for each sex in excess to 100. This can sometimes be kind of difficult to translate into actually what needs to be done. So what I've done for you, my dear students, is I've actually created tables. So a table like this, where I basically carried out the table from the over 100, and I did all the calculations for you up to, I don't know, over 1,000. Okay, and this way, for these tables that I indicate at the top here, you don't have to actually, right, for these tables right here that I show at the top, you don't have to translate it. And that way it helps you, if possible, in not having to do the calculation for the over 100. It's done for you, okay? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to link in the description for you below an example of how to do this, even more so of the over 100, and I'll get to that shortly. But I just want to make sure that you're aware of this, okay? Because it can be difficult sometimes doing these calculations of over 100 because the building code itself in the table is not super clear. So my dear students, on Brightspace for you, I've created this helpful table that you can use to figure out the over 100 type calculations. Okay? Hey, that means that we're done. Okay, so you can do homework 4 now, and I want to remind you that in the description below, I'm going to link for you this extra example that deals with the over 100. I think I'm going to do it for an industrial major occupancy, okay? And then stay tuned then for the next topic that we're going to be covering, which is going to be an introduction to sections 3.3 and 3.4. That should be an and there, me being silly, I put the wrong symbol. But it's topic 10. Super quick, okay? An introduction to section 3.3 and 3.4 because topics 11 and 12 respectively will actually cover 3.3 and 3.4 on their own. But I just want to introduce them a little bit with topic 10. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.